When a race riot took place in Springfield, the capital of Illinois, in 1908, the NAACP was created. Outbursts of anti-black violence was not uncommon, especially lynching, but the Springfield race riot was the last straw. Alarmed at the deadly event, Mary White Ovington and Oswald Gary Villard, descendants of abolitionists, as well as William English Walling and Dr. Henry Moskowitz, sent out an invitation to discuss racial justice on the centennial of Lincoln's birth. Approximately 60 people responded to the invitation, 7 of whom were colored, including W.E.B. Du Bois, Ida B. Wells Barnett, and Mary Church Terrell.
The NAACP strove to ensure the rights granted in the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments of the United States Constitution, which respectively abolished slavery and guaranteed equal protection under the law, as well as universal male suffrage. Furthermore, the NAACP's vision statement is to ensure a society in which all individuals have equal rights without discrimination based on race, through political, educational, and socioeconomic equality of minority group citizens of the United States, effectively eradicating the barriers of racial prejudice and discrimination.
In 1910, the NAACP established its national office in New York, appointing a board of directors and a president, white lawyer Moorfield Story, former president of the American Bar Association. Though there were other members, including Joel and Arthur Springern, Josephine Ruffin, Mary Talbert, and Florence Kelley, W.E.B. Du Bois was the only colored individual among the organization's executive. Despite the fundamental cause of multiracial inclusivity, Du Bois secured the role as the director of publications and research, eventually creating The Crisis, the official journal of the NAACP.
The Crisis served as the first voice of civil rights, initially subtitled A Record of the Darker Races. Critical issues that colored communities faced were discussed, additionally serving as a platform upon which intellectual and artistic works of colored artists were shared. In its first 10 years, the Crisis discussed crucial issues such as lynching and World War I. Du Bois also published the first newspaper exclusively for the colored youth in American history, titled The Brownies Book, a children's edition of The Crisis, released from 1920 and 1921.
Some of the artists featured in The Crisis were Langston Hughes and Count E. Cullen, as the Harlem Renaissance swept the nation. To expand the magazine's role in the artistic community, Du Bois founded Krigwa Players, also known as the Crisis Guild of Writers and Artists, Krigwa, in 1928, creating theater productions about the colored community by its own members.
Today, The Crisis is still the official publication of the NAACP, exploring the past and present issues of human rights for people of color in quarterly publications. It continues to discuss its impact on ethical, educational, economical, social, and political issues. Each issue features a special section titled The NAACP Today, which reports the news and events of the organization on both a local and national level.
With a focus on local organizing, the NAACP expanded in cities such as Boston, Baltimore, Kansas City, St. Louis, Washington, D.C., and Detroit by 1913. From 1970 to 1919, the organization had more than 300 local branches, and membership rose from 9,000 to 90,000. This drastic level of growth can be credited to Joel Springern, a professor of literature and one of the NAACP founders, serving as an elected board chairman in 1915 and the president from 1929 to 1939.
Many legal battles, including a massive victory against a discriminatory Oklahoma law that suppressed black voters through a grandfather clause, enabled the NAACP to present themselves as legal advocates. During its 1915 court case against D.W. Griffith's inflammatory silent film, Birth of a Nation, originally titled The Klansman in reference to the glorification of the Ku Klux Klan in the film, the thriving organization utilized the influence of media publicity.
The association highly prioritized the eradication of lynching throughout its 30-year campaign, which involved legislative battles, collecting and publicizing jarring statistics, organizing mass protests, and producing art as a means of ending the brutal crime. Overcoming the concerns of constitutionality, the NAACP favored the federal Dyer Bill, which would have punished those who failed to prosecute lynch mobs or even participated in them, and was passed in 1922 by the U.S. House of Representatives. However, the bill was overturned by a Senate filibuster in 1922. Many attempts were made to pass yet another anti-lynching legislation, such as the Costigan-Wagner bill, but to no avail. The NAACP report, 30 Years of Lynching in the United States, 1890 to 1919, reached a similar effect, drastically reducing lynching rates with the public debates which followed the report's release.
During the NAACP's most effective era of legal advocacy, Walter F. White took over as executive secretary in 1930, not only playing a crucial role due to his research on lynching, but even triumphing over segregationist Judge John J. Parker's nomination by President Herbert Hoover to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 1930, the association wrote the Marigold Report, which played an essential role in the successful reversal of the separate but equal doctrine that regulated public facilities since the Plessy v. Ferguson court battle in 1896. In 1935, White recruited Charles H. Houston, the Howard University Law School dean, as NAACP chief counsel. His strategy on school segregation cases allowed his apprentice, Thurgood Marshall, to emerge victorious in the 1954 Brown v. Board of Education, effectively overturning Plessy.
Once the Great Depression proved especially debilitating to the colored community in the 1930s, the NAACP transitioned their efforts to economic justice. The association overlooked their years of tension with white labor unions, cooperating with the recently developed Congress of Industrial Organizations in order to regain jobs for colored people. White, not only a friend, but also an advisor to First Lady and NAACP National Board member Eleanor Roosevelt, frequently arranged meetings with her to convince President Franklin D. Roosevelt to prohibit job discrimination in various existing agencies and those introduced by the New Deal.
Eventually, when labor leader A. Philip Randolph threatened a march on Washington with the NAACP, Roosevelt capitulated and opened thousands of jobs to colored workers. Furthermore, Roosevelt even arranged a Fair Employment Practices Committee to ensure cooperation from across the board.
In the 1950s, the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund, led by Thurgood Marshall, outlawed segregation in public schools. The NAACP's Washington, D.C. Bureau also advanced the integration of armed forces and expedited the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1957, 1964, and 1968, and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. However, the implementation of civil rights was a grueling and oftentimes violent process. NAACP staff members, such as Field Secretary Harry T. Moore, were met with violent threats that could quickly escalate to physical encounters. These hostile experiences were mirrored by those of black children who attempted to integrate themselves into previously segregated schools, such as in Little Rock, Arkansas, and other southern cities.
As a result, critics and other leaders of the civil rights movement felt that direct action was necessary to secure further goals of the NAACP, rather than the legislative and judicial solutions that the organization had always pursued. However, the association did support members of other protest groups through legal representation and even by providing bail for the hundreds of freedom riders in the 1960s.
Soon, the NAACP collaborated with A. Philip Randolph, Bayard Rustin, and other national organizations to arrange the iconic 1963 March on Washington, led by Roy Wilkins. Thus, the following year, the organization achieved the impossible task of securing the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Overall, the NAACP remains a thriving organization today, leaving not only a history of success for colored people, but a future that inspires communities to unite against racial segregation and job discrimination to establish equal opportunities.